You provided counsel to many presidents. What's your takeaway from doing that over decades? Like, and you serve whoever's in the house. Like you've always, what do you?
Yeah,
What's
it
it
doesn't
like?
matter
What's
whether
it like to counsel?
people ask me, does it matter who's in office? Yes and no. Yes, because I have my preferences, but no, because I have to have a relationship with whoever's in the seat of power in order to get things done. That's the reality. With Donald Trump, he's a New Yorker. And he took New York attitude into politics, took it to the South, and took it into the Republican Party, who, didn't see New York as Republican as many of us are here. I'm a conservative, right? I make no apologies for that.
Yeah.
And I'll talk about the tension that I live in as a conservative. But Donald Trump was who he has always been. He is a master at creating an image.
Hey y'all, welcome to this episode of Lights On. So grateful that you're here, and just want to quickly mention this episode is sponsored by BetterHelp, which, as you know, if you've been watching this pod at all, I've been really open about my own journey with getting healthy mentally and how much therapy has played a huge role in that. So what I want you to consider as you listen to this episode, which I know you're going to love, how free do you want to feel? How healthy do you want to get? And why BetterHelp matters so much is because the biggest gap, when I talk to people about getting healthy, it's always the same thing. Where do I go? How do I find it? Is it going to be intimidating? Just really natural, normal questions. But BetterHelp is online, and it just spares a lot of that anxious, details that go into getting vulnerable with somebody. So I want you to think about it. Check it out. What could 2025 look like if you were just a little bit more healthy? And I think BetterHelp is a great avenue to check out. So you can go to betterhelp.com/lightson and get a discount on the first time you check it out. So definitely can't hurt. Enjoy this episode. I appreciate you. I love you. And we shall talk soon. betterhelp.com. Check it out. Lights On Podcast. Dr. A.R. Bernard. It's so good to have you.
It is my pleasure, man. Really, my pleasure to be with you.
I can't hide it on my face. We've been friends for a really long time. I'm going to let people do their own deep dives on who you are because I want to maximize every minute because I got about 87 questions.
Just 87? That's all.
It's just such a perfect time to have you. I think culture, politics, life, the church world, I think there's so few people that actually speak to them well, all of them. And you're maybe one of probably two or three that I would look to go, like, how do you see this? Because for those of you who are brand new to who this gentleman is, one of the greatest churches in the world. The numbers are astronomical, but I don't even like framing it like that because there's a lot of churches that have big numbers and it's a whole lot of nothing. And then there's, you 40,000 plus in the heart of New York City, Brooklyn, in fact. Been a mentor to me for years and just appreciate all you've done. You've led politicians, athletes, everyday folks, and you've done it with integrity and you've done it with precision. And so I honor you. So glad you're here. And the biggest question I have is you being almost I don't know if it's lifelong New Yorker, but is it Knicks or is it Nets?
Oh, man, that's a political question.
Yeah, I wanted to start with
politics
the
right
hitter.
there. But before I answer that question, let me say that I'm proud of you.
Thank you.
Proud of you in that you did not allow yourself to be canceled by the cancel culture. You found yourself in a situation where you needed help. You understood the impact. And one of the things that's critical to successful leadership is resilience, the ability to bounce back when you're faced with crisis and challenge. And you're on the road to recovery and rebuilding your family and all of that. So I'm proud of you. This is what our message is: reconciliation, redemption. And you're living that out. So thanks, man, for being you.
Thank you, sir. Don't even answer that stupid question I asked.
Both, by the way.
Both. I know. I know how smart
I got
you
to
are.
do both, man.
You think you've been here. I'm with you. When I first got here, I had a bunch of favorite teams. And then the moment you start investing and supporting a human, you don't care who it is. It's right. Like when I watch an NBA game, I'm cheering for 17 people. It's like I don't care who wins. I just want people to be safe and great at what they do. Can you just give people a snapshot of pre-Christian pastor A.R. Bernard? Who was that man? Just a synopsis, because I know your backstory and your intellect and your ability to communicate cross-cultural lines, religious lines. There's a reason for it. So can you share us a little bit about that story, how you ended up becoming a Jesus follower and beyond?
Wow. But yeah, it begins with my birth, really. I was born in Panama. White father, African Latino mom.
Right.
And my father abandoned us the very day that I was born. He was an older man and put my mom in crisis. She was an athlete, ran for the Olympics, gold medalist, silver medalist, bronze medalist for Panama, Jamaica, Venezuela. She was headed to the Helsinki Games, and I came along. She lost a full scholarship to come to the United States to study at Tuskegee Institute. Her whole life was radically changed, and the very man that, she surrendered her virginity to didn't want her or the offspring. So by the time I was age 4, we came to the United States to make a new start. So this was 1957, before many of you all were born. And I entered the United States at a time that it was experiencing every revolution imaginable, precursor to the 1960s, and that decade where there was spiritual revolution, Jesus movement. There was the Vietnam War, the problems with the military-industrial complex, racism, segregation was being challenged in a way to end that. And for whatever reason, I grew up with a social, cultural, political sensitivity. I was intrigued. My heroes were Malcolm X. Jesus was not in the play yet, even though growing up as a Catholic, faith was important to me. But I did not see Jesus down here where I am, in my lived experience. That would come later. So I was part of the desegregation program. I was bussed out to white schools from my black and Latino neighborhood in Bed-Stuy and Bushwick, Brooklyn, into Queens. And experienced growing up in two worlds, a white world and my own, context of color. I made friends, and I learned the distinction between the two worlds and the two cultures. As I experienced racism, as I experienced marginalization, I became hypersensitized to it. And I discovered Malcolm X because I would travel up to Harlem to stay with my aunt who lived up in Harlem near the New York Temple there. And I saw these guys in bow ties, man, looking sharp, looking clean. And at that time, they had a newspaper. It was called Muhammad Speaks. Now it became The Last Call. But I was intrigued by that. I was part of a Methodist church only to play basketball because I played CYO ball. And they had a youth fellowship. And, we would get together and talk about the social issues. So it was part of my living experience. And finally, in high school, I became activist. So we organized to bring African American studies into a white high school because when we studied history, we, people of color, were spectators. We were not as present in that history. So we organized. They call it rioting. We call it organizing and protesting and it worked. And that was my first taste. So it led me into the Nation of Islam, which I saw not as a religious entity, but as a social protest against the failure of the white Christian church in America to deal with the socioeconomic plight of blacks in this country. It gave me a sense of order, identity, discipline, strength, voice, but it didn't give me the three things that somehow, intuitively, I knew had to be present if I was going to find God. And that is God, truth, and reality, ultimate reality. So if I found one, the other two had to be present. I found a truth, not the truth. I found a sense of order, a reality that was based upon a context created by the experience of people within the United States and American history. So even though from 1970 to 1975, I'm now subscribing to this movement, I was still open. And that's where God intellectually, through my readings and studying, and supernaturally, in two very distinct ways, connected with me. So by January 11, 1975, I gave my life to Christ. It was a very deep and profound experience for me and began a transformation.
Help me with the time frame. Did you get to walk with Malcolm X?
No,
Never saw him, or this is different?
I was a young kid
With the era.
at the time.
Yeah, got you.
So I, enjoyed him from afar, of course, as his writings began to come out, began listening to his speeches and whatnot, and some of his essays that he wrote. And let me explain rather why Malcolm appealed to me, is because he was voicing the realities of the experience of people of color that I was in. We were struggling. We were working class, edging into middle class. And he was expressing the frustrations, the realities that were our lived experience. And I said, wow, I like that. I was attracted to that. And it continued to grow as I learned more about his journey, because I could relate to that journey.
Yeah.
You see, and that's what intrigued me the most.
Interesting.
In fact, you will find that towards the end of his life, before his assassination, he and Dr. King switched hats. Malcolm began to move in the direction of human rights, universal human identity, away from segregation and that kind of thinking. And Dr. King, after Malcolm's death, that period before his assassination, he began to gravitate in the direction of Malcolm, in that he exchanged the American dream for the American nightmare that Malcolm was talking about in reaction to Malcolm's death. So the journey of Malcolm appealed to me. Dr. King, I discovered much later in life.
It's fascinating to me that I wonder what it must have been like to have two of your iconic, influential people that you look up to both be murdered. What does that do to a soul? Like, if you're building who you want to be, your life prism, and you're drawn to, obviously Malcolm X really resonated with you, and then Dr. King's, and they both get murdered. What did that feel like?
You feel like something is taken from you.
Yeah.
Here I am, this stage of life. I have no idea what a 65-year-old Malcolm would have been like.
Right.
What would have a 70-year-old Dr. King been like?
I've never thought of that, yeah.
So me as an individual, we as a people, are robbed of that journey. We understood them in the context of their time, but how would they have developed and grown?
How
and
old
what
was
would have
Malcolm
been
when
their
he died?
perspective?
Sorry to interrupt you. How old was Malcolm X when he died?
When Malcolm, wow, that's a good question. I have to remember that.
Are we talking 30s?
He was in his 30s. Yeah.
Dr. King?
Dr. King was 39. Malcolm was in his 30s.
So neither of them made it to 40.
That's right. They didn't cross that threshold.
So think about how much your brain as a man changes after 40.
That's the point.
Think about when real wisdom, real unabashed, I don't really care what you think rises up in a man.
Yeah.
It's that era.
Yeah.
So we were robbed. we were robbed.
And that's why I pointed to
Wow.
that end of their lifetime, because that's the time of transition. And the fact that they switched hats, because they were at odds with each other. Dr. King was talking about integration, joining hands with white folks, and Malcolm was saying, no, you can't trust white people.
Yeah.
You know, we've got to make our own way. And to have them towards the end of their lives, before they were assassinated, you know, switch positions. That's
something.
That's part of the journey.
Okay, so how old are you today, sir? Respectfully.
How old am I today? I'm 71.
I mean, you look unbelievable. You kept the Nation of Islam sharp dressed weaponry.
Those disciplines didn't leave me.
I've known you my whole Christian life, and I've told the story somewhere. I mean, when I was the Holy Spirit who often dips into our pots.
I'm sorry about that.
No, just as far as we go back, I was a college intern, Hillsong Church, Sydney, Australia. This guy gets up to preach, and at that time, not a lot of black men were, getting up there to preach in that particular stream. And credit to Brian Houston, for that to infuse who you are into that culture. And I remember I heard you preach a message, and then I just followed you to an elevator and,
yes,
and
you did.
moved through your security guards, not knowing that that's not what you do in big church cultures. You don't go talk to the people, and you don't, and you were so kind to me, and that began our relationship. And years later, I planted a church in New York, and you're here, but you have always looked and sounded distinctly different, and I think it's awesome. So you sit here at 71 today. Donald Trump is our president. The politic landscape is like no other time in history. So from your vantage point, from Malcolm, Martin Luther King, to decades of now we sit here today, you and I, in New York City. What on earth do you see?
Let me beg to differ. It is similar to another time in history.
Huh.
It actually reaches back 100 years.
Well, I don't know if you know this or not. I know everything. So it's interesting to be there. Please continue. It reaches back 100 years. You're actually, as you're saying something, you're right.
I beg to differ. Yeah, it reaches back 100 years. Look, history doesn't repeat itself. People do. The choices that they make, the outcome of those choices. So it was in the 1920s that we saw, 100 years ago, that we saw a similar radical conservative shift in the social and political landscape. We had the Spanish flu that killed 675,000 Americans in 1919. We had the migration of African Americans from the South to the North looking for economic opportunity, better quality of life, and jobs. And they were met with greater segregation, greater discrimination, the resurgence of white supremacist violence, including lynching and rioting, similar to the outbreak that took place during COVID and George Floyd and the reaction of American society on the ground to it. We had the Ku Klux Klan actually do a parade, 1925, down Pennsylvania Avenue in Washington, D.C., and then meet in the White House with then-President Warren G. Harding. We saw that whole white supremacist mindset. We saw conservative ideas on tariffs that caused a reaction from other nations around the world to respond with tariffs. It set the stage for economic crisis that would come. We saw isolationism as a foreign policy for America at that time, which now Trump is talking about, removing ourselves from the political landscape, the international political landscape. And what it did back then was create political vacuums that were filled by dictators, totalitarian dictators, and nationalism that led to World War II. We saw the Red Scare, where concerns about immigration, who was coming into the United States, it led to the 1924 Immigration Act, where Eastern Europeans were blocked because of fears of socialism and communism. Asians were banned from the country. So when we say that we're in a new space, no. History is based upon the same choices, because although we become technologically advanced as civilization, right, human nature remains the same. That's why I have a job, because I deal with human nature.
Perhaps I could have pointed to the type of politician and the type of politics. That might have been more accurate, because I think, well, first of all, you've provided, before I even go there, you provided counsel to many presidents. What's your takeaway from doing that over decades? Like, and you serve whoever's in the House. Like, you've always, what do you? What's
it
it
doesn't
like?
matter whether
What's it like to counsel?
And people ask me, does it matter who's in office? Yes and no. Yes, because I have my preferences, but no, because I have to have a relationship with whoever's in the seat of power in order to get things done. That's the reality. With Donald Trump, he's a New Yorker, and he took New York attitude into politics, took it to the South, and took it into the Republican Party, who didn't see New York as Republican as many of us are here. I'm a conservative, right? I make no apologies for that.
Yeah.
And I'll talk about the tension that I live in as a conservative. But Donald Trump was who he has always been. He is a master at creating an image and a reality, or a false reality, I have to say, and getting people to buy into it and live in it. He's done that very, very well. He and I sat at lunch. I was a keynote speaker for Maya Angelou's 80th birthday party. And Trump and his family were there. Oprah was the one who sponsored it. And after the gospel brunch portion of it, we sat and we talked. And, he was a different person in that he had not taken the rhetoric to the level that he took it to when he got involved in politics. All right? I get it. That's why I was surprised in 2016 when I was invited to be a part of an advisory council. I said, wow, okay, let's see. Interesting, yeah. What can I do here? Specifically around religious liberty and an agenda for the inner city. What can I do? Because look, if people of color are not at the table, there's not going to be the sensitivity necessary. And I'm glad I was there, because at that table was predominantly white evangelical leaders who I know, friends and whatnot. Yeah. But I can deal with a leader who is immoral, because I exactly know it's predictable. I can deal with a leader who's moral, which is my preference. That's predictable. But when a leader is amoral, I can't work with that, because I'm never sure what direction they're going to take.
That's a good point.
The absence of that predictability when it comes around character and moral choices, all right, that kind of choppy water, I didn't want to be a part of. So I ultimately had to come to a place, and certain events helped me to make that decision, where I had to withdraw. And that's what I did.
Well, talk to me about that tension, because one thing I think you'd be a huge help with is let me set this up contextually. There are a lot of, I don't miss a lot of my past chapter, except for times like election times, when I have to watch people do what I used to do and speak or not speak and something and and it was hard. It was really hard because there was so much to speak to.
This presidential election is what you're talking about.
Yeah,
right?
Yeah. And just
the most recent one,
yes,
2024.
In general. And I just feel like, what I see in church right now, culture, in some Christians, especially leaning on the white side, is either a confusion or a push to a side. And I wonder sometimes, for instance, I heard a preacher look at a camera and say, if somebody doesn't vote this way, you need to be prepared to tell them that they're not a Christian,
right? And
they don't even know Jesus. And then I started hearing it more and more, and I thought, who is anybody going to stand up and say, what are you saying? Like, what are you saying? So there are many people who have heard that, like, hey, it's gotten to the point now in culture where if someone doesn't vote this way, now their salvation and their God identity is now being questioned. Yeah. And this is accepted now. Yeah. And I can feel in the tone of my voice how much it does bother me. But what do you say because there are well-meaning people being swayed, which is the job of a leader to steady that. But it's like, well, I guess I heard on TikTok that if you're a Christian and you vote for this particular person, you're no longer a Christian. I guess that's right. Where do you go to begin to point to the I'm not even going to use a word, to point to a thought like that?
You got to go back to the facts of the Word of God and what Jesus actually said and did and who he was, and challenge that to the image of Jesus that they're projecting. Because a lot of this is outside of the character of God that Jesus brought forward. Jesus beautifully, artistically balanced moral order that's based upon moral law. The law of Moses, right? He fortified that, took it to another level. He said, not only if you commit adultery, if you have adulterous thoughts, that's where you have to begin to challenge yourself, right? Because the thought governs the action. So he elevated it, took it to another level. He also presented a challenge to the systems and structures that he encountered. So with the woman caught in adultery, the conversation begins with the moral representatives of the moral order, the Pharisees, bringing this woman to him, all right, early in the morning after catching her in adultery, which leads to a bunch of other questions.
A lot of questions, yeah.
But it's conspicuously absent the presence of the man, because the Levitical law says, well, if you catch someone in adultery, you not only stone the woman, because they ask the question, well, the law says this, that we should stone her. Well, where's the man? And he challenged that, that he that without sin cast the first stone. What was he challenging? He wasn't challenging the moral order. He was challenging the inequities in the application of the moral order and the moral standard. So you're applying it to a woman, which speaks to your values of women, your whole idea of the place of women within society. It speaks to the fact that you will selectively apply the moral order, all right, based upon your own preferences. He was challenging that. And to the woman, he didn't, say, you're off the hook. He said, where are your accusers? You have none, neither do I condemn you. But then he says, go and sin no more, which he now affirms. He doesn't defund the police. Right. All right? He doesn't deconstruct the moral order. He affirms the moral order. But he balances it with grace and truth. Because the reality is that Jesus came to save us and address both personal sin and systemic sin that is created by the persons who are themselves broken. And creating institutions and societal structures that reflect that brokenness. So you have good and evil, working together within these systems and structures. So he challenged them. That's not what I'm hearing. And to say that if you're you can't be a Democrat and a Christian, I heard that one too, is absolutely ridiculous when 74% of religious identified Americans are Democrats, not Republicans, not conservatives, not evangelicals. You understand? So we have to go back to the facts.
Well, I mean, that's an immediate rejection from our culture. We are not interested in that. It's beautifully said. I think that, so when let's just say there's a well-meaning person that's trying to make sense of, well, yeah, you say that, but how can my loved one at the dinner table say that they love Jesus and they say this? Let's use a real-time example, because people will hang out on abortion, and I am the abortion issue. I'm a lifelong proud conservative. Like that's always been my value stance,
right.
But I've always really resonated with people of all different stances. So I'd never found a home with, sometimes I'd be in rooms and I go, I hate the people in here. Like, I do not want to be a part of people like you, but we kind of believe some of the same things, but I don't like you. And I think there's that world where, if someone says, how? Like, I'm only going to vote for the president based on this one issue. And I have my friend, he's a Democrat, and he's not for abortion, but he has to vote this way because and what do you say to someone who's really trying to wrap their head around it? Because it is a genuine question. And that is what I have found from my vantage point to be the divider, is this one issue, and people are weaponizing it.
Yeah. And that's unfortunate because it speaks to how narrow they are in their thinking and their understanding of political and social influences. The example of the woman caught in adultery was a problem. It was a social issue that they brought.
Yeah.
Right? And it was the moral order that was bringing that social issue, which is exactly what's happening.
Yeah.
Those who claim to represent the moral order and the moral standard are bringing social issues to the public. Be it abortion, be it LGBTQ, gender identity issues, right? But let's go back to how Christian faith is so intertwined within a particular political party. Republicans and the Republican Party have effectively and successfully leveraged evangelical Christianity and created a social and emotional bond around political identity.
Well said.
This is what they did.
Yeah.
This is what they did. And if you had some time, we could unpack why they took up the issue of abortion and why they took up the issue of LGBTQ. It's because the issue that they were championing then was no longer socially acceptable.
What was that issue?
Segregation. They did not want integration. And that was a hot button issue in the 60s, taken up by Southerners. And you had a collection of Democrats who were segregationists who left the Democratic Party, wooed by the Republican Party to move to a Southern mindset, right?
Yep.
And why it was effective, because the accusation against civil rights and the civil rights movement is that it was socialist, it was communist, it was godless. So if you present to me God versus no God, if I don't do the homework, I'm going to quickly go in the direction of God.
Yeah, sure.
Right?
Interesting.
So they canceled. And Dr. King was shaped and fashioned by liberal theology.
Yeah.
Liberal theology challenged the inerrancy of Scripture, the virgin birth, the resurrection, all of these things. So you take fundamentalists who were primarily Southern Christians, and they hear something like that. You see, I told you, this is godless. So in order to preserve God in our society, we've got to rally together, right? Segregation was a problem because it was a pushback against integration, which is what Dr. King was pushing, right? And they didn't want that. They had a theological reason for segregation. So the Bible demands it. Our theology orders it. You understand what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And I can get into the reactions there.
Yeah.
So that agenda was no longer socially acceptable because of the changes that had taken place.
Yeah.
You had the Civil Rights Act. You have the Voting Rights Act. You have equal opportunity employment.
The ship had
you
sailed.
have housing.
Yeah.
You understand what I'm saying?
Yeah. So it's a
There's
business
a radical change.
So what some look at as like an acceptance of the beautiful, non-segregated agenda, really, one might say it was also a really good business move to say, hey, we lost this fight. Let's pretend it's ours. We've always been
take up a new mantle. And the LGBTQ community understood the power of the civil rights movement, so they hitched their wagon to it.
Yep.
And, they benefited from hitching their wagon to it.
Yeah.
So now when you put those things together, all right, and you understand in order to maintain political power, you have to now leverage a voting bloc. You have to emotionally appeal to that voting bloc. And they discovered a religious voting bloc to be the next level.
Oh, yeah.
And they leveraged it very well.
Yeah. 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 It's such an insightful take. I think, can you give me a practical handle?
And let me say this. There are a lot of innocent people who were swept into it.
Absolutely.
Because, part of conservative evangelical Christianity is where I grew up, where I still have those relationships. So there are honest, well-meaning people who don't know this history.
No.
They have no idea. But they got caught up in it, and generationally, it continued.
And I found, even in my own house, like my daughter Charlie, she's my resident activist. And to watch her journey, what I saw happen was the left side, for instance, like Charlie really resonated with this isn't right in a couple of moments in culture. Like I have to stand with my friends. I have to fight for those that are being marginalized. And I saw what seemed to me on that side of the ticket try to hoodwink or take her beautiful, passionate spirit, and then you get opened up to the entire ideology. So I'd sit there with Charlie and say, we got to go thing by thing. Yes, we want to stand with people who have been victimized by this, but that stream can lead to this, and try to give her a overview so she could make sure she understands, like, her well-meaning passion isn't sucked into a side. And I see that, this freaking microphone, we'll edit that, Lord Jesus. It seems like what we do is we take reasonable people in the middle, and if one side gets them, it's an indoctrination into like just an entire way to build every view. And in my own house, what I've tried to do with that is say, this is where we stand. This is who Jesus is. This is what the Bible points to, and here's how we build our lives. But so in that vein, if there is a well-meaning person listening right now and they're trying to love people on the other side of a political ticket, can you help with a frame or a stance that could really help?
I want to respond to what you're saying in that where you start determines where you end up. Right? We can't start politically. We have to begin with the transcendence of God. Jesus, God, transcended the social and political landscape of his time. And he transcends the social and political landscape of our time. We try to pull him in.
We try.
Right?
Yeah.
And that's where we make a mistake. So if we start with him as a Republican or a Democrat, if we start with him down here where we are, no, we're going to end up in all of this confusion and polarization and tension.
Start up here.
We've got to start where he placed himself and transcend it. Wonderful passage, all right? Biblical lesson. So Moses dies. Joshua takes over for him, right? Chapter 1, God affirms Joshua's leadership. As I was with Moses, I'm going to be with you. Be strong, very courageous. By chapter 6 of the book of Joshua, he's now facing his first military campaign against Jericho. Right?
Yeah.
And remember, Joshua's experience was very militant and military oriented. Going into the promised land, he said, we can take it. We got this, right? So he was Moses' guy. So he's already oriented in a certain way, framed in a certain way that's aggressive. We go in, we conquer. That's what we do. But the night before he's about to go in and do this, he has an encounter. an individual that the Bible identifies as the angel of the Lord appears in military garb as a human being. Joshua's question, whose side are you on? Which fast forward to our day, when we ask someone, especially in this most recent election, all right, who are you voting for? The real question is, whose side are you on? Because we've been so deeply divided and polarized.
Yes.
It's cloaked in that, well, who you're voting for. No, what I'm really asking you,
are you on my side?
Are you on my side?
Or am I against your side?
Exactly.
Yeah, that's great.
Because once I understand that, I know how to place you.
Great.
I know how to label you.
People literally say that out
classify
loud.
you.
All I have to know about you is who you voted for.
Exactly. And it's unfortunate. So this was Joshua's question. Whose side are you on? Are you for us or for our enemy? And it's a political campaign, though it's military, right? And the answer that is given to him by this angel is profound. Two things. He says, depending upon the translation you read, he says no or neither. Now this is critical.
Wow.
He does not choose a side. Then he says, I'm here as captain of the hosts of the Lord. So even though you've been chosen, you're in a covenant relationship, you're under orders, you represent my initiative, don't think that it means that I endorse you or everything that you're going to do in order to achieve this. So he elevates himself. I'm transcendent. I'm not on either side. I'm not identified socially, politically, militarily, nationally. I'm not identified. Even though he's speaking to the nation of Israel. He has a covenant relationship with them. But he's even saying to you, I transcend you. All right? And they'll discover this later on because their theology saw God, Yahweh, as the personal God of only Israel. And when they go through division of the kingdom in the Babylonian captivity, it leads hundreds of years later to Daniel's theological crisis in order to shift from the personal God, Yahweh as the personal God of Israel, to now he's the God of every nation of the universe. It's a radical theological crisis for him. But right now, early on, Joshua is now faced with this. No, I'm not on your side. The question is, are you on my side? Are you lined up with my agenda? And the next thing that happens in that encounter, he says, take your shoes off. You're on holy ground, reinforcing his separation, reinforcing his transcendence.
That's such a good look at that.
And looking back at Moses' experience. Right? Because even Moses, who was exposed to the gods of Egypt, had to know that this God was uniquely different and not to be added on the shelf of all the gods that he encountered. So this is happening the night before Joshua goes in. And then when he goes in, sending the spies, what do we see? We see something as part of the campaign that's out of character with God. Rahab lies in order to protect, the spies. Does that mean that God endorses a lie? No. This is a Canaanite woman, unfamiliar with the law of Moses, and yet being used, and making her own decisions. That's why he separated himself. He elevated himself. So God is transcendent. And when we start with that and understand that,
I'm preaching.
Then we don't allow all of these identities and influences that are on this human level to shape our thinking, to inform us. I'm sorry, I had to preach that sermon.
Sir, the only thing you can't do on this podcast is apologize for anything ever. We're right there on time, right? I'm going to take an extra second because I want to make sure, when it's such a beautiful opportunity in culture for us to remind people how you can think about this. Because you're making a choice to think about it as you are right now. What might be an option for someone who has extraordinary unrest, anxiety, fear, or even hate and vitriol, because right now, you see people who maybe they were on the blue side, didn't win, and you hear all the narratives, fear, terror, whatever, whether that's legit or not, there's people. And then you have a lot of very emboldened people on the other side now, like
winners and losers. Yeah.
We're back. Like, what's an option? And we're not telling somebody what to do. I want to give people an option to think, like, what would be a godly, kind way to think about the landscape that we see?
All right. So I'm going to respond through my biblical worldview. That informs me, right? Every presidential election in America, I think it's around the world, for a Christian, right? Every presidential election, the Christian is forced to revisit what they really believe about three things. Number one, the sovereignty of God. Do you believe what the scripture says, that he sets up kings, remove kings, changes times and seasons, that there's no power except that power that is by direct act of him or allowed because it relates to a much greater purpose as he moves us providentially throughout human history towards a particular end? Do you really believe that? Or do you believe that God put your candidate in, and when he doesn't put your candidate in, the devil did that? Then is God sovereign?
Wow.
Is he
great.
in control of human history?
Right.
Is he guiding and shaping the course of human history?
Yeah.
And that goes not just for America, that goes for every national entity. And if you know your Bible, you'll say yes, because that's important.
Yeah.
Remember, his sovereignty comes out of his nature, and his character. He is omniscient, so he has foresight. And he orchestrates events within human history and in our personal lives, right? In order to move in a particular direction and to achieve certain things that we don't know about. So if God is sovereign, then whoever is in power, it's God involved, either by his direct action or by his gracious allowance towards a greater purpose. You have to revisit that.
Yeah.
And if you don't believe that, then you're in charge. Your vote, your political maneuvering, your marketing, everything, you're the one that did it, not God.
Right.
So we have to revisit that. If God is sovereign, then we have to trust him with the outcome. And that outcome, regardless of how we feel about it, is an act of God.
It's a beautiful thank you, because I like saying, was God not sovereign last term? With the last president, he wasn't. He's only sovereign sometimes.
Yeah.
He's sovereign again.
Exactly.
Let's celebrate the fact that God is sovereign again.
He's back. God is
that's
back.
what.
And a point of scripture reference, Daniel chapter 2.
Yeah.
This was Daniel's crisis when facing Nebuchadnezzar and interpreting the dream.
Yeah.
Go there. We have to also revisit human governance. What does government mean from a biblical perspective? And lastly, we have to re-examine, revisit what we believe about our responsibility in connection to human governments and the sovereignty of God.
Yeah.
We don't remain passive, right?
Yeah.
We are to be active, but we cannot forget that it's not our activism that makes it happen. It becomes a tool that God uses in order to further human history.
Do you believe that America is a nation founded on Christian principles?
Absolutely.
Okay.
And that's important because we are not constitutionally Christian. We are culturally and ceremonially Christian. Do I like that? Absolutely.
Okay. That's beautiful. Your life has been marked by integrity. I broke my integrity as a minister and have learned a lot through that. You have not. What do you do and have you done to be a man? When I look at you, I see a man of integrity. I've always seen that. I see a gangster as well, a little bit of old school,
you can be a gangster and have integrity.
not Frank White vibes, but pretty close. Like you just have an authority that comes to, in my mind, your authority and your power and your passion comes from your integrity. How have you lived a life where we're pretty sure that this man is going to continue to do what he's always done. What do you think about integrity?
Let me carefully define integrity, because it can be perceived as perfection. I have not been perfect. I've made my mistakes. I've had my shortcomings. Thank God that I did them when nobody knew who A.R. Bernard was. I made my mistakes along the way and have a loving wife who walked with me for 52 years through, my own growth and development and my journey. So when we think of integrity, we're not talking about perfection. Integrity is the cornerstone of character. Honesty is the core of integrity. Character is your ethical and moral response to your life experiences. The things that come to you externally, from external forces, and the things that are happening internally. What you're wrestling through, how you respond to those things. Integrity is not a life without mistakes. Integrity is a consistent commitment to the higher self, to a set of moral standards, to an ideal, even though you know that you live in a tension between the ideal and the reality, and you struggle to meet that ideal. You need that standard. You need that ideal in your life. I've gotten better along the way because I've learned to build into my life accountability factors, those things that protect me from me, because I'm my biggest enemy. So I've got to build into my life those systems and structures and people and disciplines that protect me from my own fallen humanity that wants to take over and change the narrative. And I've been able to successfully do that over time.
I told somebody the other day, I said, what I'm learning, what I feel strongly about is you don't lose my favorite definition of integrity right now is somebody who does what they say. Like, it's very hard to miss. And my sin wasn't necessarily what broke my integrity. My response to my sin was. It is to be human is to sin, to fall on your face. It's the lie. It's the cover. It's the manipulation. It's the propagation of. And I love the fact that you just spoke to that so clearly, because I think there's a lot of people who might not realize that their integrity is growing. And what are you going to do now? What are you going to do right now? So even if you feel like you have broken it, or even if you have gone through something where you feel like that's not who you are anymore, I believe that integrity is waiting for all of us every day. You got a chance to build it.
Timothy says so beautifully, the Apostle Paul says to Timothy in the book of Timothy, 2 Timothy, I think, after 2 verse 1 and 2, I think. But it says, commit these things to faithful men who will be able to teach others.
Beautiful.
The word faithful there doesn't mean perfect. Because a faithful man, because he's trying to live up to a standard, remains quick to repent, quick to forgive, including himself, and teachable. So it's not perfection. It's consistency to the degree that we can be as broken, wounded human beings.
You are a blessing. This has been a blessing. And I'm going to do the same thing the second we're out of here. Start calling you back, doing it again. My hope and prayer, Pastor, is that you will continue to thrive in a lane that is uniquely yours. And that includes, it's so funny, we got a lot of press for being a church. I got a lot of press for being a pastor that reached a certain type of person. And I kept telling people, you just happen to write a story about it. There's a guy over there in Brooklyn. You want to talk about a guy who's reaching celebrities, whatever? Well, go talk to Dr. Bernard. But you've done it for so long, reaching all walks of people, all walks of life, that it's admirable. It needs to be studied. And I'm grateful that you're my friend. And I hope that you continue to get the opportunity to whisper in the ears of kings, because sometimes that whisper is enough to change a nation and at least bring some of the realities that we love into people who don't see it like that. So I'm grateful for you. Thank you for serving as long as you have and as well as you have, and your best chapters right now, sir. You're cooking, and you're loved. So thank you for coming on this pod.
And I love you, Carl. Watch you grow, develop, go through changes, and again, have the resilience to come back, to believe in God, to believe in yourself again. And because of our wounded, broken condition, not only do you need to believe in yourself, but we also need people to believe in us. I believe in you.
Received. We're done. You got me. I love you. Thank you. Wow.
You said cut.